The Grand Dominion Council chamber was silent as the hologram flickered to life. A dozen alien warlords, cloaked in their ceremonial battle robes, stared at the image projected before them. It was a war recording, one of their countless victories over humanity, or so they thought. A grainy battlefield transmission played, captured from the remains of a destroyed Dominion warship. The footage showed a ruined city on a barren world, its structures reduced to twisted metal and scorched earth. In the center of the devastation, Dominion warriors in exo-armor stomped over human bodies, confirming the purge was complete. Their supreme warlord had given the order: no human survivors. The species was extinct. The war was over, but then the transmission glitched. Static rippled across the image before refocusing on something impossible. A lone figure moved through the wreckage. It was human, tattered, bruised, and covered in dirt and blood. The man, no, the survivor, limped across the ruins with a rifle. Slung over his back, the warriors had left. The Dominion had claimed victory. And yet this human remained, alive, unbroken. The warlords in the council chamber exchanged wary glances. "That recording is from a month ago," one of them hissed. "How is it possible?" "Check the latest reports," the Dominion's supreme warlord growled. A data technician hurried forward, fingers gliding over an illuminated console. Numbers, maps, and reports flooded the screen. A pattern emerged, unsettling, impossible. The Dominion's colonies were falling. The human race, thought to be extinct, was striking back, not as an army, not as a fleet, but as something else. Whispers spread through the chamber. It wasn't just one survivor. It wasn't just a stray soldier. The humans were still out there, and now their vengeance had begun. The Dominion of sovereign species had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Their war fleets had subjugated hundreds of civilizations, reducing entire species to nothing more than footnotes in history. Humanity had been no different. When they rebelled, they were crushed. When they resisted, they were erased. And when the final battle concluded, the Dominion declared the war over. Every human stronghold had been destroyed, every colony reduced to glass. The Earth itself had been rendered inhospitable, an irradiated husk drifting in the void. The last remnants of humanity were nothing but ash, or so they believed. Yet now, something had begun unraveling in the Dominion's core worlds. It started with minor disturbances, outposts going silent, supply convoys disappearing, communication relays inexplicably failing. Then came the attacks. At first, they were dismissed as isolated pirate raids. But the precision, the efficiency, the sheer brutality of these strikes suggested something far worse. Someone was dismantling the Dominion from within. The key players at the center of the Dominion's response was Grand Warlord Zygron, a ruthless strategist whose species, the Ralzar, had long prided themselves on their war dominance. With his crimson battle robes and reptilian features, Zygron had led the final invasion of Earth himself. He had personally given the order to burn humanity's last cities to the ground. And yet, now he sat in the Grand Dominion Council chamber, fists clenched. Listening to reports of a ghost, across from him stood High Inquisitor Velcara, an enforcer of the Dominion's law and order. Unlike Zygron, who relied on brute force, Velcara was meticulous, cold, and calculating. Her species, the Zephyr, were infamous for their ability to infiltrate and manipulate enemy civilizations before destroying them from within. She studied the war reports with narrowed eyes. "This is not random," she said, her voice smooth yet sharp. "This is coordinated, strategic, a force with intent." Zygron scoffed. "A force? You speak as if an army of humans still exists." Velcara turned her piercing gaze to him. "Perhaps not an army, but a survivor. The lone human on the surface of a cold, desolate moon, a lone figure knelt beside the wreckage of a Dominion supply convoy. His breathing was slow, controlled. His hands worked methodically, pulling apart what was left of the transport's blackened hull, searching for anything of use. His name was Elias Voss, and he was supposed to be dead. Once he had been a soldier, one of the last defenders of Earth. He had watched his home burn, seen his people slaughtered, but he had not perished. For years, he had survived in the shadows, scavenging from abandoned war zones, striking from the darkness. He had no fleet, no backup, no allies. He had only his wits, his training, and an unbreakable resolve. And now, after years of waiting, he had begun his war. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about revenge. Setting the stage, the Dominion spanned thousands of star systems, each ruled by species that had long since learned to fear and obey its warlords. Vast orbital fortresses stood watch over occupied worlds, enforcing Dominion law with an iron grip. Massive planetary cities housed billions, all under the belief that their rulers were invincible. But in the shadows, something was changing. Elias had begun his work in the outer colonies, striking at isolated military outposts. He moved like a phantom, never staying in one place, never leaving survivors. He cut off supply lines, sabotaged key infrastructure, turned the Dominion's own technology against them. At first, the Dominion dismissed the attacks as random acts of terrorism. Then, they saw the pattern. Someone, something, was hunting. In them, and deep in the heart of the Dominion, Zygron and Velcara were beginning to understand the unthinkable. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they would pay the price. The Dominion was at war. They just didn't realize it yet. At first, the disappearances had been sporadic, an outpost failing to report in, a supply convoy vanishing mid-transit, a planetary governor found dead under mysterious circumstances. But as the cycle continued, the pattern became undeniable. Someone was waging a silent, invisible war against them, and that someone was human. Elias Voss moved like a shadow through the Dominion's vast empire. He was no longer just a soldier. He had become a predator. He had no fleet, no reinforcements, no allies. All he had was his mind, his will, and the skills he had sharpened over years of exile. And that was enough. His first major strike came on Carthos 7, a vital Dominion mining world. The planet produced the rare isotopes needed to power their war engines, its surface covered in sprawling industrial complexes. Elias knew that a direct assault would be suicide. Instead, he infiltrated the refinery using stolen Dominion credentials and a reprogrammed security drone to gain access. The work was meticulous, the timing perfect. A virus slipped into the refinery's control systems, a subtle override in the coolant valves. A single well-placed detonation. Within minutes, the largest Dominion mining operation in the sector was gone, consumed by an inferno of its own making. Zygron watched the footage in barely restrained fury. "This is not the work of a dying species," he snarled, slamming a fist against the armrest of his throne. "This is an insurgency." Velcara, standing beside him, remained composed. "No, this is something worse." She brought up a holomap of recent attacks. Supply chains severed, key Dominion officers eliminated, weapons stockpiles raided. These were not random strikes. Each was a calculated blow to the Dominion's core strength. "This is not an army, Grand Warlord," Velcara said coldly. "This is a single human." Zygron's jaw tightened. The idea was absurd. A lone survivor, against the might of the Dominion. Impossible. Yet the data did not lie, and it got worse. The Dominion had believed themselves thorough in their extermination of humanity. They had bombed Earth into a wasteland. They had wiped out its colonies. They had slaughtered every human soldier they could find. But they had forgotten one thing. Humans. were survivors. Elias had uncovered what the Dominion had missed, a hidden remnant of humanity scattered across the stars. Small groups living in secrecy, smugglers, refugees, deserters, and forgotten warriors. And now he was bringing them together. On a derelict space station drifting in a lawless sector, Elias met with the first of them, Sarah Vasquez, a former Earth Navy captain who had managed to keep a civilian transport hidden for years. She had a ship, a small crew, and one thing Elias desperately needed: knowledge of Dominion supply routes. With her help, the insurgency grew. One by one, survivors joined the cause. A disgraced Dominion scientist who had turned against his overlords. A hacker who had spent years dismantling Dominion security systems. A former Dominion soldier who had seen the horrors of war and chosen another path. Together, they were not an army, but they were enough. And soon, the Dominion began to realize their mistake. The next target was Drakkar Prime, a Dominion stronghold that served as a regional command center. It was a fortress world, its orbital defenses capable of annihilating entire fleets. A direct assault was impossible, but Elias didn't need a direct assault. Instead, he infiltrated the planet's security network, feeding false orders to Dominion command. He made them believe that a massive human fleet was approaching from the Outer Rim. In response, the Dominion redeployed their warships, leaving the planet's capital vulnerable. That was all Elias needed. His team struck fast. Explosives planted in the planetary archives erased decades of Dominion intelligence. High-ranking officers were assassinated in coordinated strikes. The Dominion's own weapons were turned against them. By the time the Dominion realized the deception, the damage had already been done. The legend of the ghost of humanity was born. In the halls of Dominion power, the fear was growing. The warlords, who had once dismissed humanity as a minor inconvenience, now spoke in hushed, wary tones. Reports of Elias Voss spread like wildfire. Some called him a myth, a fabrication of paranoid minds, but others knew better. He fights like no other species, Velkara admitted in a closed council meeting. He does not engage in open battle. He does not challenge our fleets. He moves unseen, striking only when the moment is perfect. Zigran's claws tightened. Cowardice. No, Velkara corrected. Strategy. A long silence followed. The Dominion had spent centuries waging war against species that followed predictable patterns, but this was something different. Elias Voss was not fighting to win battles. He was fighting to end them. And if the Dominion did not stop him soon, they would lose not just a war, but their entire empire. Elias stood aboard an abandoned Dominion battlecruiser, watching the holographic display of the enemy fleet. The Dominion's forces were mobilizing, preparing for an all-out campaign to hunt him down. Good. Because that was exactly what he wanted. He activated his communicator. "Sarah, are the charges?" "Set, ready and waiting," came the reply. Elias smirked. The Dominion thought they were going on the offensive. They had no idea they were walking into their own funeral. The Dominion had assembled its largest fleet in decades. From the burning remains of their strongholds, from the ruins of once thriving colonies, the warlords gathered, calling forth their dreadnoughts and battle cruisers, their legions of armored warriors, their most ruthless assassins. The ghost of humanity had pushed them too far. Zigran stood on the bridge of the Dominion flagship, the Imperator's Wrath, his golden armor reflecting the eerie glow of the surrounding fleet. "No more games," he growled. "We will erase this phantom from existence." Velkara stood beside him, arms crossed, her voice cold as ice. "You still believe he is a ghost. He is something far worse. A survivor with nothing to lose," Zigran sneered. "Then we shall give him nothing left to fight for." The fleet prepared to descend upon Varkos 12, a barren, forgotten world where Elias Voss had been sighted. Their scanners had detected human. Ships scattered among the ruins of an ancient war. The remnants of humanity had gathered here for one last stand. The Dominion would crush them, or so they believed. Elias Voss stood on the rocky cliffs of Varkos 12, the wind howling around him, dust whipping at his face. Below, Sarah Vasquez and her crew worked in silence, planting the last of the explosives. The Dominion was coming. He had made sure of it. Every intercepted transmission, every leaked report, every calculated risk, it had all led to this moment. "They're in position," Sarah said over the comms. Elias nodded. "Then we begin." High above, the Dominion fleet began its descent. Warships blotted out the sky, their weapons primed, their soldiers hungry for vengeance, and that was when the first explosions tore through space. The Dominion had underestimated their enemy for the last time. As their fleet moved into position, hidden mines, thousands of them, salvaged from their own destroyed warships, ignited in a synchronized detonation. Plasma fire ripped through hulls, chain reactions, sending entire cruisers spiraling out of control. Panic erupted in the Dominion's ranks. Zygron bellowed orders. "Shields up! Regroup! We are under attack!" But the true horror had yet to begin. As the Dominion struggled to reorganize, human forces, small, fast-moving attack ships, struck from the wreckage of the battlefield. They didn't fight like soldiers in formation. They fought like survivors, like hunters, like ghosts in the dark. Sarah Vasquez led the charge, her battered corvette weaving through the chaos, striking at weak points with ruthless precision. The Dominion was being picked apart. In the chaos of battle, Elias boarded the Imperator's wrath alone. He moved through the corridors like a phantom, dispatching guards with brutal efficiency. This wasn't an invasion, it was an execution. At last he reached the command chamber. Zygron and Velkara stood waiting. For a long moment there was silence. "You are a fool to come here alone," Zygron growled, drawing his blade. "You are outnumbered." Elias smirked. "So were we. That didn't stop us." Velkara watched him, her calculating gaze revealing something Zygron failed to see. Elias wasn't here for revenge. He was here to end this war. The battle raged beyond the walls, but inside the command chamber it came down to 3. Zygron lunged, his massive frame crashing toward Elias like a storm of steel and fury. Elias ducked, weaving past the strike, landing a calculated shot that sent the warlords staggering. Velkara moved to intervene, but hesitated. She had seen something Zygron refused to acknowledge.